If you showed me this album art, I wouldn't even consider listening to it. But it's an album by an artist who right now is being considered pop punk adjacent. And there are a ton of people out there who will point at modsun and artists like him and say that he is the future of pop punk and the sound of pop punk, even saying that he is saving pop punk. So here we are, talking about an artist, modsun, who I would have looked at and immediately judged as someone who's not really in the scene, which I admit is not fair of me at all. modsun is a self-proclaimed scene kid, and I 100% am inclined to believe him. I mean, he has a clear love for bands like Blink-182 and Newfound Glory and all the drive-through records era pop punk bands. So I'm sure that at any time, him and I could sit down and he could school me on trivia about most pop punk history. Early modsun would be defined by rap and hip-hop. You'd have to take like a microscope to his work to see any influences from his scene days. And as far as his early stuff goes, I hate it. It wouldn't become clear how much influence modsun was pulling from the scene until his release of the 2020 record, Internet Killed the Rockstar. You could even say that he is straight up pirating a lot of the sounds from that scene. And when he decided to shift to a more pop punk guitar-driven rock sound, you could say that he did it at the absolute perfect time. Travis Barker was propping up a ton of music that sounded like that. Machine Gun Kelly, for better or worse, bring another spotlight to this genre. And with that spotlight, just outside of it, that's where modsun was. And look at today, modsun now has millions of listeners every month on Spotify. So you can say that his shift in sound was a very smart move on his end. And it would be so easy to look at modsun and look at the album art covers and say, this is going to be something that I am going to loathe. But apparently he plays for the pop punk team now. So let's talk about him. modsun is the answer to the question, what if Machine Gun Kelly was likable? It's hard not to notice the similarities stylistically and musically between Machine Gun Kelly and modsun. They're also close friends. modsun directed some videos for Machine Gun Kelly even. And apparently Machine Gun Kelly told modsun that he was going to bring pop punk back into the mainstream. But where Machine Gun Kelly thrives in feuds and controversy and general shit-eating, modsun takes the much less sexy road of gratitude and vulnerability and kindness. Let's put it this way. Learning about Machine Gun Kelly makes me like his music less. Learning about modsun makes me like his music more, which is especially apparent in his most recent album as well as the press cycle of that album. And truthfully, I was not expecting that going into making this video and researching modsun. I expected to find what I found about Machine Gun Kelly. But modsun has lived a life, He's lived the life of a rock star. He's battled addiction of many kinds. He's been put through the ringer. He's been very open about all this and hoping that his story can help people better themselves and take life by the reins and take control of their life if they're battling with those kind of addictions. I think he's very well spoken and he takes music and the art form very seriously. A lot of the stuff he says is going to make people roll their eyes, sure, but also a lot of the stuff he says are things that I've been hearing from purists for a long time. We want to hear real instruments. We want someone who knows how to sing. We want someone who cares about the album and the experience of listening to an album front to back. These are all things that modsun cares about, which is why I loved the rollout of his latest album, God Save the Teen. He made a big deal about how there weren't any singles for this album. He wanted someone to sit down and listen to it all the way through. That was super important to him. The only lead up to the album that we got was him posting these very short videos with him reading the lyrics over it, just saying them, not singing them, just reading the lyrics over a short video on Instagram and on social media, which I thought was a really cool way to promote the album without spoiling the album. I really liked what modsun was doing with that. And wait, hold on. Is that a Crossley? Never mind. Fuck this guy. He says all the right things. I cheer when someone advocates and respects the experience of listening to an album front to back for the first time. I find the story of his recovery inspiring. I love how much reverence he has for the musicians that came before him, and I love that he focuses on learning from the bad behavior of previous rock stars instead of glorifying it. And he talks about wanting to bring real instruments back into the mainstream. I've seen a headline like that every year for the past 5 years, and I'm still going to applaud it every time I hear it. So leading up to the release of this album, it was so hard to listen to all the interviews and get hyped for the rollout of this record of God Save the Teen and then hear it for the first time and not like it. I like it barely more than I liked Machine Gun Kelly's latest two releases, which I also didn't care for very much. I do want to say that when I say I don't like them, I don't think they're zeros out of tens. I know it's super popular to give these a not good review or call them worthless trash. I think I'd give Tickets to My Downfall, Mainstream Sellout, and this new album by modsun 5 out of 10s. I don't like Machine Gun Kelly, so maybe that makes it a 4 out of 10. And I really like modsun, so maybe that gives it a 6 out of 10. Am I a hack fraud for not being able to separate the art from the artist in this case? Maybe. Ratings are dumb anyway. I just want to bring that up because I've never agreed that Mainstream Sellout and Tickets to My Downfall are god-awful pieces of trash, like I've seen a lot of people say. So this album just isn't for me at this point in my life, but I know that there are a ton of people who are going to like this album a lot. So I am going to treat this as a piece of art that deserves to be respected. The album opens up promising enough. Eyelids got me pretty excited for the rest of the album. I don't like the vocal effects that modsun is using. I don't think it's going to age very well. It's in the opening seconds of this album big time, but that's pretty much what the vocals sound like throughout the entire record. And I'm a person that loves bad vocals. I don't want to hear a polished turd. I want to hear the turd. The rest of the album, unfortunately, just does not click with me. There are two tracks that I dislike immensely: SOS and Revenge. The chanting of letters that spell out a word, can we leave that behind in 2024? It's too late for 2023, but next year, can we just forget about that? Like, is this a middle school cheerleading team fight song? modsun has made it clear that this is an album that is inspired by love, and that feeling oozes through this album, especially in Avril's song and Shelter. And although I like those songs, lyrically it's just not a lot for me to chew on. But they do still end up being my favorite moments on this album. And I used to be an absolute sucker for these kinds of rock ballads. That's why I used to love the Goo Goo Dolls so much. There's a successful attempt to shake things up with Courtney Fucked Kurt. The back half of this album is fine. I was shocked to learn that there's only 36 minutes of content in here. It feels a whole lot longer than that. A highlight on this album for me is the last 30 seconds. Finally starts to bring in some rapping into it, and it was a really nice change of pace that worked for me, and then it perfectly loops into the first song again, which I thought was cool, but overall it ends up being a pretty underwhelming listen. And I want to be fair here, because just because I don't like this record doesn't mean that it's not a good record at all. There's going to be people who love this record, and 10 years ago, I would have adored this album. This sort of just found me at the right spot in my life when I was really into super slow rock ballady songs with this kind of lyricism in it. At that time in my life, I was super into the Goo Goo Dolls, and I think this sort of fit right in with those music tastes for me. And this reminds me a lot of a Goo Goo Dolls record, and not just because of the Iris cover on this album, but God Save the Teen and modsun's music in general just hit me a little different at 26 than it would have when I was 16. I'm just not primed for a record like this, in the same way that 10 years ago I wouldn't have cared to hear what modsun had to say about addiction and love and art. Whereas now I'm more interested in watching an hour-long interview with him than I am listening to a 30-minute record by him. And pop punk is in a very weird spot right now. The spotlight is on guitar-driven pop rock being called and hailed as pop punk, and people like MGK and modsun and all of these other Barker core people are being hailed as reviving the genre. Even Rolling Stone is saying things like that. And you've got gatekeepers saying that this isn't real pop punk, who are upset at modsun and MGK for existing or cashing in on the sound of pop punk. It feels insincere to a lot of people, which I also understand. But these people are selling a lot of records. They're getting a lot of listens, especially compared to the real pop punk bands who are playing to nobody at tiny venues. So like it or not, the perception of pop punk is shifting a little bit, thanks in large part to artists like Machine Gun Kelly and modsun. And albums by them are clearly not for me, not going to be for a lot of people, especially if you loved this album. Tell me why in the comments. I'm not going to debate you. I just really want to hear from someone who connected with an album like this. What are they getting from it? Does it make them more excited for pop punk? And I also want to know if the pipeline is real, because I hear a lot of rhetoric of oh, well, this is going to bring in new listeners to pop punk, which means that someone who loves modsun is eventually going to find a band like Arm's Length and latch on to that style of music, which I don't know if that's necessarily true. But if that's happened to anyone here, please let me know. I would love to hear that that's true. I hope that modsun keeps making music. Every time he releases a song or an album, I will be tuning in. I think he's a very talented artist. And again, I love everything that he's been saying about music and art. So I want to see what someone like that can put out. And he is taking Stand Atlantic on tour real soon, which I think is pretty cool. I am debating whether or not I want to go and see that show live, just to get a feel for what a modsun new wave of pop punk show is going to look like in comparison to what I've seen before. So I think that'll be cool to see. What I really hope is that one day modsun's music clicks with me. Thanks for watching.